Hello, my dear students. I wish all my students a very happy day, a very pleasant day. All right. Today we are going to learn a very beautiful poem, a very nostalgic poem written by Dilip Chitre, and it is The House of My Childhood. From the title, we all can assume that it is all about childhood, right? Yeah, this is going to be a nostalgic work, nostalgic poem. So now we learn who is Dilip Chitre, what are his works, and especially what is this poem about, The House of My Childhood, about. Alright, we'll see its themes and literary devices used in this poem. This is all what is going to be there in this video lecture. Okay, now we'll see who is Dilip Chitre or who was Dilip Chitre because Dilip Chitre is no more now. He was a very noted and a very important, influential, bilingual poet. Who is a bilingual poet? A poet who writes in two languages. Alright, and the two languages in which Dilip Chitre wrote were Marathi and English. Okay, so he wrote in two languages, Marathi and English. That is why he is called bilingual poet. Alright, and he had been writing poetry for more than 50 years. Alright, yes. And, he believes, his literary activity or creative activity, I should tell, creative activity included painting, filmmaking, etc. And he believed that all these activities are endless extensions of his poetic sensibility. He believed in his poetic sensibility. He believed in the poet which was there inside him. And he believed that it is because of his poetic sensibility that he is, guided to do all this activity like painting, filmmaking, etc. Alright, he wrote once, poetry has been the mainstay of my creative practice for more than 50 years, and he wraps his life with poetry. His life is covered with poetry. That means he gives more importance or utmost importance to writing poetry. Alright, he loves poetry. Yes? We'll see his important collections of poems. Dilip Chitre, who was an Indian poet, translator, painter, fiction writer, critic, and filmmaker, was born in 1938 in Baroda and he died in 2009. Now we'll see his important collections of poems. As is Where Is, which was published in 2007. Post-climatic love poem published in 2005. No Moon Monday on the River Karbha published in 2000. The Mountain, which was published in 1998, Traveling in a Cage, which was published in 1980. These are the important collections of poems in English language. I've already mentioned he is a good translator. He is famous for translation as well. Right. And he has translated Saint Tukaram, Marathi Bhakti poet and poetry of 12th century poet. All right. And, we'll wonder how come he has got so much of poetic sensibility. What has led him to write so much of poems? It's only because he travels a lot. Okay, the traveling experiences always helped him to write beautiful literary works and he's traveled to many countries in Europe, Asia, North America and the inner parts of India. We can see majority of his poems are lyrical and autobiographical in nature. They always highlight or they always tell us about the crisis of inner life. Usually his poems have themes like life, madness and death. Now this is a poem which we have to learn. The house of my childhood. The house of my childhood stood empty on a grey hill, all its furniture gone, except my grandmother's grindstone and the brass figurines of her gods. After the death of all birds, bird cries still find the mind. After the city's erasure, a blur still people's ear. in the colorless crack that comes before morning, in a place where nobody can sing, words distribute their silence among intricately clustered cliffs. My grandmother's voice shivers on a bare branch. I toddle around the empty house. Spring and summer are both gone, leaving an elderly infant to explore the rooms of age. Now I'll explain stanza wise. Each stanza I'll be explaining to you. The house of my childhood stood empty on a grey hill, all its furniture gone, except my grandmother's grindstone and the brass figurines of her gods. See, we all have a special yearning, a special like to go back to our ancestral home because ancestral home is all about love, about happiness, about sharing, about caring. We have all these memories of being together. അല്ലേ തറവാട് വീടെന്ന് പറയുന്ന ആ വീടിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള സങ്കല്പം എല്ലാവർക്കും എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഒരുപാട് ഷെയറിങ് ഒരുപാട് കെയറിങ് കിട്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സ്ഥലം ഒരുപാട് ലവ് സന്തോഷം ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ള സ്ഥലം സോ എവ്രി വൺ ഓഫ് ഹിസ് ഐ ഷുഡ് ടെൽ എവ്രി വൺ ഓഫ് ഹിസ് വുഡ് ലവ് ടു ഗോ ബാക്ക് ടു അവർ ചൈൽഡ്ഹുഡ് ഡേയ്സ് സ്പെഷ്യലി ടു അവർ ആൻസസ്ട്രൽ ഹോം അല്ലേ ഇപ്പോൾ ഒരുപാട് ചാലഞ്ച് കാണുന്നുണ്ട് എന്താണ് 10 ഇയേഴ്സ് ചാലഞ്ച് സോ ഒരു 10 ഇയേഴ്സിന് മുൻപ് നമ്മളെല്ലാവരും ഈ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ ഒരുമിച്ചായിരുന്ന അവസ്ഥയിൽ മേ ബി ഷുഡ് ബി ആൻസസ്ട്രൽ ഹോം അവിടെ ഒരുമിച്ചിരുന്ന് എന്താ പറയുക കുഞ്ഞുങ്ങളായിരിക്കുമ്പോഴുള്ള ഫോട്ടോ ആൻഡ് ദെൻ ആഫ്റ്റർ 10 ഇയേഴ്സ് അഗെയിൻ അതേ പോസ്ചറിൽ ഫോട്ടോ എടുക്കുന്നത് മീൻസ് അതിനകത്ത് നമുക്ക് വി നോ വി ഓൾ ഷുഡ് അണ്ടർസ്റ്റാൻഡ് ദ ഗ്രേറ്റ് യാർണിങ് വിച്ച് വി ഓൾ ഹാവ് ടു ഗോ ബാക്ക് ടു അവർ ചൈൽഡ്ഹുഡ്. Alright, so ancestral home in a special feeling, where we all have experienced moments of, being together, of caring, love, happiness, everything. Alright, yes. ഈവൻ മിസ്സിന് ഒരുപാട് അങ്ങനത്തെ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസസ് ഉണ്ട്. അതായത് തിരിച്ച് തറവാട് വീട്ടിൽ ഒരുപാട് സന്തോഷമുള്ള സമയങ്ങൾ, സ്ഥലമില്ലാതെ ഒരുമിച്ച് താഴെ പായ വിരിച്ച് ഒരുമിച്ച് കിടക്കുന്ന സമയങ്ങൾ, റൈറ്റ്? അതിലൂടെയൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ പഠിക്കുന്ന ലൈഫിൻ്റെ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് ലെസൺസ് അല്ലേ ഹാവ് ടു ലിവ് ഹാപ്പിലി വിത്ത് ഓൾ ദ ലിമിറ്റഡ് റിസോഴ്സസ് വിച്ച് വി ഹാവ് റൈറ്റ് യെസ് സോ ഐ ബിലീവ് ഓൾ ഓഫ് യു വുഡ് ഹാവ് ഈവൻ ദോ ആൻസസ്ട്രൽ ഹോം എത്ര ചെറുതായിക്കോട്ടെ വലുതായിക്കോട്ടെ വി നോ ഹാവ് ടു ലിവ് വിത്ത് ദ ലിമിറ്റഡ് റിസോഴ്സസ് ദാറ്റ് വി ഹാവ് അങ്ങനെ പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്നത് ഈ ആൻസസ്ട്രൽ ഹോമാണ് ആൻഡ് ഹാവ് ടു ബി ഹാപ്പി വിത്ത് എവ്രി വൺ around us, right? So here we see how Dilip Chitre would love to go back to his ancestral home, and when he went back to his ancestral home, he saw it's all empty. The empty ആണ് because no one is there to take care. അവിടെ ഇപ്പോൾ ആരുമില്ല, അവിടെ ആരും താമസിക്കുന്നില്ല. So no one is there to take care of that house. So again, that stood empty on a grey hill, and hill is not green. The hill is grey. Grey color symbolizes lifelessness, sense of lifelessness, both in the house as well as in the hill. So our hill grey aana, house emptied aana. So there is no life. That lifelessness is expressed using the term grey. Grey color symbolizes monotonous or, colorless or lifelessness. Okay, now all its furniture gone because it's sold, maybe it's sold out. So no furniture is there in the house. Only two things which he could find in the house were grandmother's grindstone and the brass figurines of her gods. So two things were revealed about his grandmother. One is his grandmother was a traditional Indian woman who used grindstone. It gives us a hint about the traditional life which were led by Indian women. Alright. And the second thing is that she was a very spiritual woman because she was having her gods. And these two things were not taken up by anyone when the house is sold out. Alright. So you could see these two things. One is his grandmother's grindstone, and the other one is the brass figurines. Figurines means again figures or statue. Okay, all right, of her gods. All right, so these two things were not taken away from the house, though the house is emptied. No one is there in the house. All right. After the death of all bird cries still fill the mind. After the city's erasure, a blur still people's ear. What beautiful lines. How beautifully written, right? See, we all have had this experience, right, of, nostalgia, right? See, when we go back to a college, we can, though we cannot see our friends, though we cannot see all our teachers have taught us, we can still feel their presence. We can still hear the voice, right? That is what Dilip Chitra is telling here. He could not see any birds there. Death of all birds means since there is no life in the house, since the hill is grey, since there is no life on the hill even, there are no birds to sit on the branches of trees there. There are no birds to sing there. But though he could not see any bird, though he could not listen to any song now, he cherishes those memories, in which he had heard, listened to these sweet melodies of birds, of days when he woke up listening to the sweet sounds of birds. So he still cherishes those memories, and because he loved those memories a lot, he could feel the presence of birds, though he could not see birds right now. ഓക്കെ, അവിടെ ബേർഡ്സ് ഒന്നുമില്ല. അതാണ് ഡെത്ത് ഓഫ് ഓൾ ബേർഡ്സ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞത്. അവിടെ ലൈഫ് ഇല്ലാത്തതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ബേർഡ്സ് ഇല്ല. പക്ഷെ ആ ബേർഡ്സ് പണ്ട് പാടിയിരുന്ന ആ ഒരു സമയവും കാലമൊക്കെ ഓർക്കുന്നു. ഓക്കെ, Dilip Chitra ഓർക്കുന്നു. After the city's erasure, a blur still people's ear. See, the people in this house have moved to a city for a new life. So no one is there in the house, but he could still feel the presence of the people in that house. People's ear means he could still feel the presence. കണ്ണിൽ ഇങ്ങനെ കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ട് ആൾക്കാർ, family members moving here and there. All right, that is what we all experience, right? When we go back to some building or something that in which we all have lived together. Though no one is there in that building or in that institution or in that house, we could still feel the presence of the people with which or with whom we all have lived. പണ്ട് നടന്ന കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ നമ്മുടെ കൺമുന്നിൽ കാണുന്ന പോലെ, അല്ലെ? പണ്ട് നമ്മൾ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യങ്ങൾ, കേട്ട കാര്യങ്ങൾ, നമ്മൾ പഠിപ്പിച്ച കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ കേൾക്കുന്ന പോലെ ഒരു ഫീലിംഗ്. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് വാട്ട് ദിലീപ് ചിത്ര ഹാസ് എക്സ്പ്രസ്ഡ് ഇൻ ദിസ് സ്റ്റാൻസ. ഹി കുഡ് നോട്ട് സീ എനി ബേർഡ്സ്, ഹി കുഡ് നോട്ട് ഹിയർ ടു എനി not listen to any bird song, but he could still feel the presence of birds as well as people in the house. All right? Yes. In the colorless crack that comes before morning, in a place where nobody can sing, words distribute their silence among intricately clustered lips. Here in this stanza, he was telling how nostalgic the memory is. Though there is no one to sing, though there is no one to talk to, he could still feel the presence and sounds of the people, who were in that house, of his family members. Words, and that is not a place where anybody can sing, right? Because there is no one to sing, right? Then words distribute their silence, but I can still hear, I can still listen to the words of those people, who were there in the house. He still cherishes those memories among intricately clustered glyphs. Glyphs is like something like an imprint. എംപോസ് ചെയ്ത് വെച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സംഭവം പോലെ, എന്തെങ്കിലും ഇംപ്രിൻ്റ് ആക്കി വെച്ചിട്ടുള്ള സംഭവം പോലെ. സോ ദറ്റ് മീൻസ് ദ വോയിസ് ഓർ ദോസ് മെമ്മറീസ് are imprinted in his mind, that he cannot forget those things. He cannot forget the people, their voices, their talks, their way of life. He cannot forget how birds used to sing in the morning. Though there is no one to sing now, he can still feel the presence. He can still listen to those, voices. So all these memories are imprinted like a glyph. Glyph is something like an imprint, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ emposed thing, എൻഗ്രേവ്ഡ് തിങ്. മനസ്സിനകത്ത് കാവ് ചെയ്ത് വെച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട് ഈ മെമ്മറീസ് എല്ലാം. ആ മെമ്മറീസ് എല്ലാം ഓർമ്മ വരുന്നു എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. ആരുമില്ല, ഒന്നുമില്ലെങ്കിലും he can still feel the presence of life in that house, in the midst of lifelessness, because everything is imprinted in his brain, in his mind, and he loved those memories. My grandmother's voice shivers on a bare branch. I toddle around the empty house. Spring and summer are both gone, leaving an elderly infant to explore the rooms of age. Here we could feel his great love to go back to his childhood days. And here we could understand, the the pleasure that he gets from going back to his ancestral home, because he still remembers the voice of his grandmother. He still could feel, the presence of everyone in this family, and he could remember his childhood days. He could remember himself as a child. ഓക്കെ, ഒരുപാട് സന്തോഷത്തോടു കൂടിയിട്ട് ആ വീട്ടിൽ ആരും ഇല്ലെങ്കിലും എംറ്റീഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഹൗസ് ആണെങ്കിലും ഭയങ്കര സന്തോഷത്തോടെ ഓരോ റൂമിലും പോയി ഹീ ഫ്ലൈസ് ബാക്ക് ടു ഹിസ് യുനോ childhood days. Okay, so my grandmother's voice shivers on a bare branch. He could listen, or he could hear the voice of his grandmother. He still remembers her voice. I toddle around the empty house like a child. He is going around, seeing or enjoying his ancestral home alone, all alone. Spring and summer are both gone. Time flew away like anything. Time has passed like anything. ഒരുപാട് കാലം കഴിഞ്ഞു. Spring പോയി, summer പോയി, leaving an elderly infant. Now I've grown too big, but I would love to be an infant, a child. I would really want to be a young boy who enjoys everything in this house, who had a very innocent love for everything in this house, to explore the rooms of each. I would love to be a child, or like a child, and explore the rooms of each. Understood? I would love to go back to my childhood days in which I had very pleasant memories, or very pleasant experiences, I should tell, in this ancestral home. Okay, so this is what is House of His Childhood by, Dilip Chitre. Yes. So we'll see what is there in this poem. So in this poem, The House of My Childhood, the poet Dilip Chitre narrates how his childhood house had changed after the demise of his grandmother. The house remained empty without furniture. The only things of the past that continued to remain in that house were the brass statue of deities and a grindstone. As he continued to look at the house, he felt his grandmother's voice coming from the branch of a tree. Although he could see that his house was deserted, the poet could not resist the urge to go around it and explore all the rooms with very innocent happiness or pleasure. So now we'll see what are the themes of this poem. Of course, without any doubt, we can say it is nostalgia, which is one of the themes. ഒരു തീമായിട്ട് വരുന്ന നൊസ്റ്റാൾജിയാണ്. From the very beginning of the poem till the end, we see how theme of nostalgia is brought in this poem. He misses the entire happiness of his childhood. We see how he toddles around the house. വീട്ടിൽ ടോഡൽ ചെയ്ത് കുഞ്ഞുങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്ന പോലെ നടക്കുന്നത് വി സോ ഹവ് ഹി ലവ്സ് ടു ഡു ദാറ്റ്. ഓക്കെ, ആൻഡ് how he could remember the shivering voice of his grandmother, and how he could feel the presence of his family members, and the grindstone and the brass figurines. So all these are memories of his childhood, nostalgia. So nostalgia is one of the themes of this poem. And next one is, we could see the difference between old life and modern life, right? What all activities are there in a rural household. As we saw grindstone, കാണുമ്പോൾ we can relate to the life, old life, rural household activity. All right, and then have religious, have spiritual women wear. When we saw figurines, brass figurines, right? Yes. ഇവരുടെയൊക്കെ സ്റ്റാച്യൂസ് ദേവതമാരുടെ സ്റ്റാച്യൂസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ദൈവങ്ങളുടെ സ്റ്റാച്യൂസ് കാണുമ്പോൾ we know how women were spiritual or religious, or people were religious or spiritual. Women especially അല്ല, but grandmotherൻ്റെ പൊസിഷൻ ആയിട്ടാണ് പറയുന്നത്. Alright. Then, yeah. So these are the things. So we so have nostalgia as one of the themes. Another theme is old versus modern life. Okay. And then even time had taken away summer and spring with him, leaving the elderly infant to toddle around the house to find the lost stages. He would really love to go back to his lost stages. Okay, that's what. We see these are the themes in this poem. All right? Yes. So I believe my students have understood. Now we'll see what are the literary devices used in the poem, The House of My Childhood. The first one is alliteration. What is alliteration? I believe most of the students might know what is it. It's a very easy thing. Alliteration has got another name like head rhyme. Head rhyme means, the first sound or the initial sound of the two successive words will be same. Alright, successive words means what? Words that come one after another. അടുത്തടുത്ത് വരുന്ന വാക്കുകളുടെ ആദ്യത്തെ അക്ഷരം will be same. Aditya sound, it's not aksharam, sound will be same. The sound of the first letter of the two words that come one after another, which is called successive words, right, will be the same, which is called alliteration. Another name is head rhyme. Usually initial sound ആണ് റിപ്പീറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് വരുന്ന, അല്ലാത്ത കേസുകളുണ്ട്. മിഡിൽ സൗണ്ട്സ് ഉണ്ട്. യൂഷ്വലി ഇനീഷ്യൽ സൗണ്ട്സ് ആയിരിക്കും റിപ്പീറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് വരുന്നത്. ഓക്കെ, ആൻഡ് ദർ ആർ it's called alliteration. And the example which is there in the poem is colorless crack. You'll see in one of the stanzas, the words like colorless crack. Colorless k, crack, first sound is k. So the figure of speech used there is alliteration. I believe my students have understood. Yeah? So in the phrase colorless crack, there is a repetition of the same consonant sound k. Like colorless first sound is k, crack has the first sound as k. So successive words have the same sound, that is k. And familiar example of alliteration is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. So in these words, we can see how per sound getting repeated. Per sound. Okay, so this is alliteration. I believe my students have understood when the sounds get repeated of the two successive words. Alright, and the next figure of speech used in this poem is oxymoron. What is oxymoron? You might have heard the phrase like terrible beauty. Terrible beauty. When we understand very well that beauty is never terrible. But contradictory ideas, when they are joined together to give a different meaning, to give a peculiar meaning, a strange meaning, it's called oxymoron. In this poem, we have a oxymoron, or we have a phrase like elderly infant. Elderly infant means what? ചെറിയ കുട്ടി, a child. A child cannot be elderly. But there is a specific purpose for using this phrase, right? So when two contradictory ideas or when two contradictory words come together, got it, to get a specific meaning, it's called oxymoron. As in the case of terrible beauty, beauty is never terrible. And something terrible can never be beautiful too. അല്ലേ? ഇപ്പം ടെറിബിൾ ബ്യൂട്ടി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സംഭവം രണ്ട് ടെറിബിൾ എന്നുള്ള വേർഡും ബ്യൂട്ടി എന്നുള്ള വേർഡും they contradict each other. They oppose each other, but they are used as a phrase, and as in the case of elderly infant. Okay, so oxymoron is a figure of speech which contains words that seem to contradict or oppose each other. Okay, as we all know, elderly or infancy, these two are different phases of human life. They cannot be used together. But if they are used together, it becomes oxymoron. Yes? മനസ്സിലായെന്ന് മിസ് വിചാരിക്കുന്നു കേട്ടോ. Alright, thank you. Now we'll see what are the literary devices used in the poem The House of My Childhood. The first one is alliteration. What is alliteration? I believe most of the students might know what is it. It's very easy thing. Alliteration has got another name like head rhyme. Head rhyme means, the first sound or the initial sound of the two successive words will be same. Alright, successive words means what? Words that come one after another. അടുത്തടുത്ത് വരുന്ന വാക്കുകളുടെ ആദ്യത്തെ അക്ഷരം will be same. ആദ്യത്തെ sound, it's not അക്ഷരം, sound will be same. The sound of the first letter of the two words that come one after another, which is called successive words, right, will be the same, which is called alliteration. Another name is head rhyme. Usually initial sound ആണ് repeat ചെയ്ത് വരുന്ന, അല്ലാത്ത കേസുകൾ ഉണ്ട്. Middle sounds ഉണ്ട്. Usually initial sounds ആയിരിക്കും repeat ചെയ്ത് വരുന്നത്. Okay, and there are, it's called alliteration. And the example which is there in the poem is colorless crack. You'll see in one of the stanzas, the words like colorless crack. Colorless, k, crack, first sound is k. So the figure of speech used there is alliteration. I believe my students have understood. Yeah? So in the phrase colorless crack, there is a repetition of the same consonant sound k. Like colorless first sound is k, crack has the first sound as k. So successive words have the same sound, that is k. And familiar example of alliteration is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. So in these words, we can see how per sound getting repeated. Per sound. Okay, so this is alliteration. I believe my students have understood when the sounds get repeated of the two successive words. All right. And the next figure of speech used in this poem is oxymoron. What is oxymoron? You might have heard the phrase like terrible beauty, terrible beauty. When we understand very well that beauty is never terrible, but contradictory ideas, when they are joined together to give a different meaning, to give a peculiar meaning, a strange meaning, it's called oxymoron. In this poem, we have a oxymoron, or we have a phrase like elderly infant. Elderly infant means what? ചെറിയ കുട്ടി, a child. A child cannot be elderly. But there is a specific purpose for using this phrase, right? So when two contradictory ideas or when two contradictory words come together, got it, to get a specific meaning, it's called oxymoron. As in the case of terrible beauty, beauty is never terrible. And something terrible can never be beautiful too. അല്ലേ? ഇപ്പം ടെറിബിൾ ബ്യൂട്ടി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സംഭവം രണ്ട് ടെറിബിൾ എന്നുള്ള വേർഡും ബ്യൂട്ടി എന്നുള്ള വേർഡും they contradict each other. They oppose each other, but they are used as a phrase, and as in the case of elderly infant. Okay, so oxymoron is a figure of speech which contains words that seem to contradict or oppose each other. Okay, as we all know, elderly or infancy, these two are different phases of human life. They cannot be used together. But if they are used together, it becomes oxymoron. Yes? മനസ്സിലായെന്ന് മിസ് വിചാരിക്കുന്നു കേട്ടോ. All right. Thank you.